And good morning. My name is Kelly Wilson, and today we're going to be talking about understanding behavior. I'd like to tell you a little bit about my background briefly. For the last 5 years, I've been working on a grant called PTR, which stands for Prevent, Teach, Reinforce. The entire focus of this grant has been challenging behavior. The national statistics for challenging behavior and effectiveness of interventions look like this. If there's the most highly skilled behavior analyst developing a behavior plan, there's about a 33% probability that that plan is going to be effective. So what we found in doing PTR for the last 5 years is that when we use a process for developing behavior plans, and we really look at understanding the behavior first to develop the behavior plans, we find that we are having percentages that are about 80–85% effective with our interventions. So what we're going to do today is we're going to start by just the very beginning of behavior, which is understanding behavior. If you have a behavior plan and people are lacking understanding as to why they're doing it, the plan may not work. So that's what we're going to focus on today. I'd like to take a moment to introduce the project that I'm currently on, which is the Colorado Center for Social and Emotional Competence and Inclusion. And we are funded by various sources in the state. This project is a state project. We are funded by the Division of Child Care, the Division of Developmental Disabilities, Part C, and the Division of Behavioral Health. So I am very, very happy to be here today, and I'm very thrilled to have the funding to be able to present to all of you. If you have questions, please type them, and I will do my best to answer them as we go along. Framework for today, where I'd kind of like to get started, is one of my favorite quotes from Albert Einstein. If at first the idea is not absurd, then there is no hope for it. And when you think about challenging behavior and understanding behavior, I think that it often hinges into that realm of absurd. My computer is responding very, very slowly today. So we're going to begin by looking at what some of the research does show us about understanding behavior and challenging behaviors. The best time to intervene is when no problem behavior is occurring. So I want you to just take a moment and think about that. When is our attention usually drawn to behavior? Typically our attention is drawn to behavior when there's some kind of crisis or something going on or something happening. So to actually be looking for challenging behavior or to be thinking about behavior when there's no problem occurring requires a conscious effort on our part. That's one of those things that seems to be absurd. Why think about a challenging behavior when it's not happening? Because that's the best time to teach it. Another thing we know through research, one way to effectively support children with problem behaviors is through teaching effective skills or teaching appropriate skills. In PTR we call them replacement. And there's a process to figure out what's the right replacement skill that we want to be teaching. And we'll look at that a little bit today. Another thing that research is showing us that PBS intervention strategies were effective in percentages as high as 80%, reducing challenging behavior by 80% and having an impact, which is significantly higher than what the research was showing us previously before we started implementing PBS. And lastly, PBS was more effective when a functional assessment was used. So what do we mean by a functional assessment? A functional assessment is really looking at why is the child doing that behavior? What are they getting from it? a behavior that persists more than 2 weeks is working for the child. So what we need to figure out before we decide what strategy we're going to use is, what is the child getting from that behavior? Why are they doing that? When we figure out what the function of the behavior is, then we can start looking at when does it happen and what skills can we teach. And that's kind of a very rudimentary description of a functional assessment. So a functional assessment is really going to draw on some gathering of data and looking at what's happening before the behavior, what's happening after the behavior, and developing interventions that really hinge on the functions of the behavior. Oftentimes we do behavior plans based on which strategy we're most comfortable with or which strategy we think of first. So in looking at understanding behavior, we're going to just naturally tease out what the functions are and what the skills are that we'd want to teach so the child can achieve that function, but in an appropriate way. And that's what all the research is supporting. Now, the next thing I'd like to try doing is the hot button activity. And here, and Josh, I'm hoping you can help me with this. This is where I would like people to be able to unmute to participate.
Absolutely. So if you have something to add to this conversation, please go ahead and hit *7 on your telephone, and you'll be able to, your personal phone line will be unmuted, and you'll be able to join the conversation. So if you want to go ahead, Kelly, show your desktop and bring up that document, and then folks, as they provide feedback, can hit *7 to unmute their phone, and then *6 remute your line.
Okay, and then how do I do my desktop?
So hit select action, show your desktop.
Got it. Okay, so what we're going to do here is I'd like everybody to think about what are those things that really press your buttons, those things that really just get you. For example, for me it's whining. I really cannot tolerate when somebody is whiny. So if anybody has a hot button that they can think of that they want to share, just hit *7 to unmute and share the hot button.
Great. And Kelly, again, in select action, show your desktop to bring us to that Word doc. Great.
Okay. You there?
Hello?
Yes.
Explaining why I'm doing what I'm not supposed to do.
Okay.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Explaining
why
you're doing something that you're not supposed to be doing.
Yeah, or why you're not doing what you are doing. Like, I asked you to put your coat away. I was going to go wash my hands. You see what I mean?
Okay. So kind of explaining the directions.
No, not explaining the directions. Instead of doing what he's supposed to do, he tells me why he's not going to do it.
Oh, okay. Okay, now I get it.
Yeah. Now do I *7 again to remute, or?
*6 will remute your phone line, please.
Okay.
Hi,
Okay,
Kelly,
anybody else?
really.
Mm-hmm.
Kids tearing up all the visual strategies.
Yeah, that one is because you spend so much time getting them ready. Good one. Okay.
Spit.
Spitting.
Kelly, notice also that folks are chatting in comments on this as well.
Okay.
Blatant disregard for directions.
Okay.
Hurting other kids.
Okay.
Biting other children.
What was that one?
Biting.
Biting. One of mine, when my son was little, when he was 3, 4 years old, one of my hot buttons was cussing. And having a child with challenging behaviors, it's amazing how they're born to instinctively know what your hot buttons are. So that was one of his behaviors, was cussing. And it was one of my hot buttons. Any other ones?
Relentless no's.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now the next thing I want you to do is think about how you feel when somebody is doing these things, when somebody is just jumping all over your hot buttons and just pressing your buttons. How do we feel when those things are happening? And again, chime in with how that makes you feel.
When someone's not behaving according to their directions and mistreating your own feelings, it tends to make you want to just stop working with them and kind of walk away.
Mm-hmm.
Spitting makes me feel humiliated.
It does. I agree.
And it makes my heart race and me get short of breath, and I think my voice changes.
Yeah, I can actually have physical changes.
Yeah.
I feel frustrated and angry and just want to call the parent and say, come get him.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me have to take a deep breath and just start going through my strategies. Okay, what has worked before? What hasn't worked before?
I think useless, vulnerable, and out of control.
Okay, now think about all these things in red. Stop working with them, walk away, heart racing, voice changes, out of control, useless, frustrated, angry. And now I want you to think about this. When you're here in this place where you're feeling frustrated and angry and out of control, think about, is this a time when you are on top of your game, at your best, doing really well, ready to handle all kinds of challenges? Here's the cruelty with challenging behaviors. When a child is exhibiting challenging behaviors, this is when we most need to be on top of our game. This is when we need to be sharp. This is when we really need to be on it. Typically what's happening at this point in time, though, is this child is pressing all of our hot buttons, and it is putting us in the opposite place of where we actually need to be to carry out interventions, to react the way we want to react, to handle the situation in the way that we want to. We are typically caught right here in our hot buttons. For example, I told you my son would cuss. And we would get into a store, and he would want to leave the store, so he would say in his very loud, strong voice, shit. And all those feelings you mentioned, embarrassed and helpless, is exactly how I felt. So what I did in that situation is I left the store. Now, when you're looking at myself and my behavior with Colin, what I've just taught my son is that if you cuss, you can leave and we can be all done. So by reacting to Colin through my hot buttons, I'm teaching him that this is the kind of behavior that you need to do to leave the store. Hot buttons, I don't care how good your behavior plan is, if you're stuck in your hot buttons, you're going to have a really hard time carrying through behavior plans and actually reacting the way that you want to react or the way you may need to react. So with hot buttons, we're not going to be able to get over it. You know, for example, I don't like whining and I'm never gonna like whining. But being aware that that's your hot button, and now what do we do about that? So we're going to look at how we reframe that so that we're not stuck in our hot buttons and we're not stuck reacting emotionally to the behavior. We're going to push through that so that we can get into more of that functional assessment kind of piece where we're looking at behavior not as the topography of the behavior, the spitting, the hitting, but we're looking at it functionally. By Colin cussing in the store, he was able to leave the store. So when we look at that functionally, we have a sense of what it is I need to be teaching because he's trying to escape the store. So I need to teach him how to be in the store and then how to exit the store appropriately. So with our hot buttons, we really need to be aware of what our hot buttons are. Now let's say I'm working in a classroom and spitting is my hot button, but my assistant, she's not that bothered by spitting. It's not her hot button. There's other things that she really can't stand, but that's not one of them. One of the classroom strategies that I may use is every time Josh comes in, I know he's going to spit at art activity because that's one activity he doesn't like. So we may switch, and instead of me helping him in that activity, I may have my assistant help him through that activity. Now that's not to say that I never work with Josh, but that means that for that specific activity or that particular time, we may kind of share the responsibility of the strategies. I want you to also think about when your hot buttons are being pressed, how does that impact your ability to form a relationship? How does that impact your ability to interact with that child or even that child's family or parents? Somebody had said in how that makes you feel that you just want to call home and have that child go home, or you want to walk away, or you don't want to work with them. So when we have our hot buttons being pressed, the very foundation of the teaching pyramid is establishing positive relationships. When our hot buttons are being jumped all over, and typically we know that it's going to be Groundhog Day. We know that if this child has this behavior today, they're probably going to have it tomorrow and the next day. So right there, we're already we're in a very compromised place when we can't even form that relationship with a child who has challenging behaviors. So one thing I wanted to look at quickly are the symptoms of being had. And you'll see, and just look at them and think if you've ever been in those situations. He does it all the time. What do you expect? Now what we're going to do in reframing, once we've identified our hot buttons, we want to reframe it. So reframing it is the symptoms or the signs of getting better. So acknowledging the behaviors that upset you. Acknowledging what you actually want to see. What do you want to see the child doing? Collecting data is a really great way for reframing. And celebrating any changes for the better. So that could be recovering from a behavioral episode. Josh? Okay, thank you everyone. Sorry for that, the delay in the echo. So signs of reframing your hot buttons. Again, celebrating if there's any changes in the behavior. And looking for support from your team. So let's look at some of the ways that we can achieve that reframing. The ABCs of behavior, antecedents, behavior, and consequence. First thing I want to look at is the behavior itself. Okay, the behavior is an action that can be observed. Antecedents are going to be our triggers. Our triggers are things that happen right before the behavior. So consequence is what happens right after the behavior. So for example, with Colin, the consequence was leaving the store. The antecedent was going into the store, and the behavior was cussing. So first, let's look at behavior. There's a couple of things that we know about behavior. So behavior, we know, is predictable. It does not occur in a vacuum. We can change behavior when we understand the predictors, which are our triggers, and the consequences, what happens after the behavior. Those things can be changed. The other thing is we have two primary goals when we're looking at behavior. We want to reduce behavior that's inappropriate, and then we want to increase appropriate behavior. Some basic behavior assumptions, and when we're looking at replacement behavior, we really want to look and see what skill it is that we need to teach. It could be language, it could be social. When we're looking at reframing, our focus is really on the focus of, or the function of the behavior and what we need to teach. And this I've just said, if the behavior persists more than 2 weeks, it's working for that child. So whatever they're getting, the consequence of that behavior is what they're trying to get because it's working. And lastly, we know that if we have positive relationships, supportive classroom environments, and we're directly teaching social and emotional skills, it has a great impact on reducing challenging behaviors. I'm hoping you guys can hear me a little bit better. Now, functions of behavior, this is the simple part. There's only two functions of behavior. I want something, I want to get away from something. Now, if you think about all challenging behavior, they fall into one of these two categories. I want to get something, I want to get away from something. So given the example with Colin, he wanted to get out of the store. What we need to do when teaching a new skill is we need to make the problem behavior irrelevant, inefficient, and ineffective. These are the three means for shaping behavior. Now, as I said, we want to reduce inappropriate behavior and increase appropriate behavior. In order to do that, we take the problem behavior and apply these three means. We want it to be irrelevant, inefficient, and ineffective. Now, when we're teaching an appropriate behavior, we want the appropriate behavior to be the opposite: relevant, efficient, and effective. These are the primary goals of shaping behavior. So we have the old way, and we'll compare it to the new way. Okay, the old way, we're looking at some general intervention for all behavior problems. So to give you an example, that would be this child is spitting, so what's the intervention for spitting? Okay, now I was working in a setting where there was a child who was spitting, and there were 3 different settings that he was using this spitting behavior. He would spit when it was free playtime. He would spit at the small group art activity, and he would spit at home while jumping on his little mini trampoline. So to use a general intervention for spitting, there's 3 different purposes, 3 different functions. So the new way would be to match the intervention to the purpose of the behavior. So for example, the art activity, this child would get there, he would spit, and he would get removed. So the intervention had to focus on teaching him how to be in that small group. When he went to centers, he would start spitting, and he would get one-on-one adult attention. So the interventions are going to be different based on the purpose. In the first example, spitting was used to escape, to get away. In the second instance, it was used to get something, to get attention. Those will be two different interventions for the same behavior. So that's the old way versus the new way. Intervention that's reactive versus intervention that's proactive. Now, in order to do this, we really have to look at what happened before the challenging behavior. So reacting when Sally pulls hair at block, in order to switch that to the new way, we have to think of what skill we want to teach Sally at block and teach it before she goes there, and then reinforce it on her way and support her when she gets there to use that new behavior. The old way focuses on reducing the misbehavior. So we would focus on how do we make Sally stop pulling hair to get her block. Focus on teaching would be teaching Sally to share or to use her words and to ignore misbehavior. Now, I'm not saying when she's pulling hair, don't do anything about it, but know that's going to happen and redirect it by teaching that new skill of sharing. Okay, and lastly, so the old way involves a quick fix. The new way is really focused on a long-term, sustainable behavior change. So in looking at behavior, the topography of behavior, we're going to now look at what comes right before that. So what are our antecedents? What are our prevention strategies? Now, one thing that I always train on is about expectations and understanding routines. And a lot of times, people are feeling like they do this really well. This is one of the main big bang areas in prevention. When children understand the routine, when they understand expectations, when they're engaged in meaningful activities. These are very, very easy to say, but they're complicated to do because we're looking at children understanding expectations of their behavior when they're in all different levels of development, when they have perhaps disabilities, perhaps other family issues going on. These are really challenging to do. If you can display your routines in pictures, and not just your schedule, but your routines and how you run your routine. So for example, an arrival routine, what is that going to look like? What's the beginning, the middle, and the end? And how are children going to know beginning and the middle and the end? In PTR, we broke down strategies into prevent strategies, teaching strategies, and reinforcement strategies. What's most effective when developing behavior plans is to have one prevention strategy, one teaching strategy, and one reinforcement strategy for every behavioral strategy or every behavioral intervention. Some prevention strategies are transition support, environmental support, are going to be your visuals, providing choices, classroom management, opportunities for pro-social behavior, and these are not the ones that happen just spontaneously. These are planned pro-social behaviors. Providing choices is a strategy that a lot of people do, but really looking at providing those choices before a challenging behavior occurs. So when you're at blocks, the choice sometimes is given. You can share the blocks or you can move to another center. But providing choices means giving those choices prior to that behavior happening, not when it's already in progress. The trick with the antecedents is to actually see what happens before the behavior occurs. And in order to do that, you really have to consciously make that effort. So behavior involves both the topography of the behavior, which could be sitting, or whatever, hitting, some of those hot buttons that we mentioned. The other component to behavior is teaching the new skill. What is it that we want to do in place of the misbehavior? So Ben Franklin says the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and then expecting different results. So when I work in a classroom and they say that every time Tommy acts up in circles, pulls hair, hits other people, interrupts, he gets removed to timeout. Chances are Tommy didn't want to be in circles anyways. So constantly removing him, even if you're totally consistent, if what you're doing does not match the function of the behavior, we fall into that realm of insanity. We're doing the same thing over and over again and getting the same results when sometimes people are expecting it to be different. So the most important thing to ask yourself is, what is the function of that behavior? Function of behavior can be tricky. Again, there's only two functions, to get or to get away. Sometimes, though, we can't tell what the function is. Sometimes it's both. It can be to get and it can be to get away. So the next thing I want to look at is form and function. And my slide won't advance. So the form is going to be what the behavior looks like. And that's typically going to be your hot button. And it's going to be hard for you to move past if you're just focusing on that action, that behavior. The function of the behavior is what happens right after the behavior. So spitting is the form. Being removed from the activity is the function, and that one's clearly escaped. But there's a lot of them that are not clear. The child is getting typically attention from being removed. So it's hard to know if the function is the attention they get to be removed or if it's actual escape. So, as far as some circle time strategies, what's really important in circle is not one single strategy. Like I said, we want to prevent, we want to teach, and we want to reinforce. So typically, to make those circles successful, to include all kids, is going to include some kind of robust strategy. For example, for the prevent strategies, we may look at what is our circle time sequence. So do we do opening song, some kind of academic activity, song choice, and then maybe we go to centers. A prevent strategy would be giving Johnny that visual. First we have song, then we have this lesson, then we have song, and then we go to centers and we're all done. So the prevention strategy could be defining that circle time so the child knows clear beginning, middle, end. Then you might want to directly teach a skill and then reinforce that skill. Some teaching strategies next involve replacement skills, problem solving. They might involve some specific academic skills. You might want to focus on pincer grasp or holding scissors, things like that. Teacher-pleasing behaviors are really defined as following the rules, following directions. Perhaps you're in a setting where children raise their hands. So those are more of the teacher-pleasing behaviors. Now, if you are looking at a behavior and a function, you should be able to pinpoint which one of these teaching interventions is going to fit best. So maybe with Johnny, we're working on increasing his engagement time. So that's going to be our teaching intervention. What we want to focus on is if he can already sit for 2 minutes, how do we get him to 3 minutes? How do we get him then to 4 minutes? So the teaching intervention could be increasing engagement time. So the prevent strategy would be giving him that visual definition of circle. The teaching intervention could be increasing engagement time. Next. The last piece of the intervention, we have our prevent, we have our teaching strategy. Now we need to look at reinforcement and consequences. What we know about consequences is that if the consequence is pleasant, the behavior is going to occur, and it'll occur more often. If the consequence is not pleasant, the behavior will decrease. Again, where we get tripped up here is that, to me, leaving the store and not getting our shopping done is unpleasant. For my son Colin, it was very pleasant. So we get caught up in the consequence from our viewpoint. What we need to think about is the consequence from the child's viewpoint. So I like to think of this as a new job. If I were asking you to come and work for me, what would it take for you to come work for me? I don't know, maybe better pay, maybe closer to home, more vacation time. If I tell you, come work for me, and I will double your workload and pay you less, are you going to want to come and work for me? Of course not. And that seems silly to even say that. However, when we're working with children who have challenging behaviors, we're asking them the same thing. If you think about it, the job you have, you may not love it, but it pays the bills. The job the child is doing currently, the behavior to get their needs met, is paying the bills. They may not love it, but it's paying the bills. If we want them to take a new job, a new skill that they're not already doing, something they're going to have to put more effort into, they need a better payoff than the current job that they have also. So if we want them to do a new job, like use your words, share your toys, sit at circle. If we want them to do a new job, the payoff has to be bigger. Next. The way we make that payoff bigger is in our response. So there are a few ways to respond to appropriate behavior and inappropriate behavior. And this is going to depend on what you want to see increase and what you want to see decrease. Remember, that's the two functions of behavior intervention. If we want appropriate behavior to increase, we can do, everybody's familiar with compliments and praise. The other really big one is commenting. So impossible to do on a webinar, but if you were sitting with me and you were taking notes, I may say, look, Beverly is taking notes. Now, I haven't said you're doing a good job. I haven't said any kind of compliment, but what I have done is commented on what Beverly is doing. This is just as powerful as any praise or any compliment. When you comment, you're showing your interest in what that child is doing, and that is just as powerful as compliments and praise. Now, the other trick is that typically when there's a misbehavior, we react pretty big to that. You know, when Johnny pulls Sally's hair and Sally screams, we're going to react pretty big to that. So if you're thinking about payoff and the new job paying off better than the old job, then our reactions to appropriate behavior need to be bigger than our reactions to inappropriate behavior. So if you're going to react really big to inappropriate behaviors, know that appropriate behaviors are going to have to be even bigger if we want the appropriate behaviors to continue. Now, once you're in a reactive position, behavior's already occurred, you really only have two choices. You can ignore the behavior or you can redirect it. You really can't do much teaching once an inappropriate behavior has occurred. You're right at the tip of that crisis, and you really don't have any place to go from there until everything de-escalates and the situation has passed. So when you're responding because the behavior has occurred, really try to think about what's the function. Is it behavior? Is it escape? And kind of use that to help you decide whether it's something you can ignore or something you need to redirect. Okay, now. Some reinforcement strategies include reinforcing functional behavior. And that one sounds really easy. That can also be really challenging. If you have a child that's been really acting up and hitting other kids, and they come back and they start doing what they're supposed to be doing, oftentimes we're still caught up in our hot buttons, and we're still mad about what happened. So to comment on how they're doing their work, or they're building with blocks, or talking nice to Sally can be a challenge. Those are the times that we really have to supply that positive feedback. Ratios of positive to negative is probably one of our big bang strategies. When we look at positive to negative, we're looking at a ratio of about 5 to 1. 5 to 1 meaning we want to make 5 positive deposits to every one withdrawal. Deposits include those things we've talked about: praise, comment, commenting, anything that's positive. When we look at withdrawals, that's giving directions, placing demands, asking a lot of questions. those things are all withdrawals. If you can be very cognizant of making your 5 deposits before you make a withdrawal, you will see the impact of that strategy. That's the big bang. And it's hard to do, especially when you know every single day that Sammy comes in, she's going to have trouble transitioning into the classroom. And maybe she comes in and she's whining, which is one of my hot buttons. How am I going to make my 5 deposits? Okay, well, with whining, you can probably do that. What if she comes in and she's hitting and sitting and really having a hard time transitioning into the classroom? You may need to redirect that. You may need to immediately respond to misbehavior. How are you going to get your 5 deposits in? In those cases, I always advise people, think ahead. The day before, when Sammy's leaving class, start making your deposits. And be cognizant to have enough deposits in so that when you need to make a withdrawal, you can do it. Okay. There's a question about techniques and their lack of effectiveness. Timeout, sticker charts, things like that. What makes these techniques lose their effectiveness is when we are not focused on the function of behavior. That's one. Sometimes we are not giving the sticker rewards immediately, so there could be a delay. In other times, it's our reinforcement. Our reinforcements are just not strong enough. If we don't have a strong reinforcer, this goes back to the new job. If the child doesn't have a reason to want to do the new behavior, to want to do the new job, then it's not going to be effective. And with reinforcement, there's 2 ways to deliver reinforcement. You can set it up. Well, let me give you an example. Let's say after this webinar, I'm really thirsty. I go down to the Coke machine. I put my money in. I hit Coke. Nothing comes out. So what do? Do I put more money in? No, I don't. Because I'm expecting when I put my money in to get my Coke. Now later on that night, my mom comes in town and we decide to go up to the casino. We put our money in, we pull that handle down, nothing comes out. Do we leave? Well, if you're me, you do, because it stays that way for me. But most times, we don't. We keep pulling the handle and pulling the handle. Okay, so why am I telling you about Coke machines and slot machines? Coke machine is reinforcement when teaching a new skill. When we do Coke machine reinforcement, every time the child does the skill, they get a reinforcement. So it's immediate and it's every time. We use that kind of reinforcement when we're teaching a new skill. We use that till we hit acquisition of skill. Once we have acquired the skill, now we're going to fade back our reinforcement to the slot machine. Now we want our reinforcement to be more intermittent. Now I caution you not to fade back too quickly. We need to give it a good solid 2 weeks in skill acquisition. When we know the child has acquired the skill, then we fade the reinforcement back to the slot machine where they're getting reinforcement intermittently. There's a question about behavior that is resulting from home trauma. What we have found, and certainly there are cases where you're going to need support and mental health providers to help you with some of those situations. In the classroom, if we really stick tight to those pyramid practices, those positive relationships, and with our behavior strategies, we want to really focus on that social emotional teaching, use a lot of visuals. That's a very heavily supported behavioral intervention. And those are highly individual. But again, I would follow that same process of prevention strategies, teaching strategies that directly hit the function of the behavior, and reinforcements that are really, really strong. And sometimes we do like reinforcement assessment, and we'll hold out 2 things we know the child really likes and have them pick their favorite. And we'll do that a few times to figure out what is the most powerful reinforcer. And then we save that and use it just with our behavior intervention strategy. Okay, next. So in looking at understanding behavior, I think the key to what we've been talking about this morning is the fact that the way we view the problem in a very large measure determines the strategies that we choose to solve the problem. Does anybody have, we have about 4 more minutes. Anybody have any other questions they want to ask? The key in understanding behavior is really understanding ourselves. We need to understand what our hot buttons are and how we can reframe that to move past that. So we can figure out what are the skills we need to be teaching. When we're reacting to what's happening, we're not even in a place where we can be actively teaching. So we have about 2 more minutes. Any further questions? And I thank you all for being patient through my technical, we'll call it technical growth, because I sure learned a lot. And there's been a couple questions about the PowerPoint, and I will make sure that I email them out to everybody that was on the call today. So yes, you will have the PowerPoint.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. This was really helpful.
Good. I'm glad. I'm glad. There was a question about, are there ways to make a withdrawal? Withdrawals are demands, requests, anything that requires a child to perform, to do something for it. Multiple questions are withdrawals.
Thank you for your time. I enjoyed your class.
Great. Thank you for attending this morning, and I hope you all have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.